we've always needed to have a theory in order to
Yeah.
make predictions. And I think what's interesting about um, AI and machine learning is that if you have enough data, you can make predictions without theories. Um,
Yes, that's
and so you turn like a scientific problem into an engineering problem.
hmm.
You sort of unbundle prediction from explanation, and I think you could build AI models that predict who's going to get depression or who has it or who's going to get better or what treatments are going to work or all that kind of stuff. And so, that's really great because it's like you can make progress on lots of things that like we haven't been able to make progress on for a long time. And B, what's really interesting is that if you can effectively predict depression, you probably inside of your neural net have a theory for what it is encoded in there somewhere, and you can probably find it.
Hi everyone, my name is Balázs Kegl and this is the I Scientist podcast where we explore artificial intelligence, the body and the soul. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce Dan Schipper. Actually, we'll talk a lot about GPT. So I asked GPT who is Dan Schipper. It gave me a pretty cool summary. So Dan is an entrepreneur, a writer, and the CEO and co-founder of Every, a daily newsletter on business, AI, and personal development, read by nearly 75,000 founders, operators, and investors. He writes a weekly column at Every called Chain of Thought, where he covers topics like AI, tools for thought, and the psychology of work. And you correct everything, of course, if it's not true. So before founding Every, Dan was the CEO and co-founder of Firefly, an enterprise software company.
I mean, it's pretty good. Didn't get anything really wrong. I mean, chain of thought. I really just cover AI stuff now, and more specifically ChatGPT. But and I have a podcast. But other than
Yes.
that, I did a really nice job. I'm impressed.
Yes, thank you. So how are you today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Brooklyn, and I'm excited to be here.
So it's the afternoon in the US. It's a bit late here in Paris, so sorry if I'm mumbling my words. I try to get the adrenaline flowing so we will have fun for maybe an hour, hour and a half.
All right, I'm
So
excited.
I like Dan because you are making the living of the writing industry. And GPT hit us in 2023, and my first reaction as somebody who's living on writing would have been panic, like what's going to happen. And you took it head on, this revolution, and I really like your approach to use GPT in creative ways. We'll talk about it. And also, we are both fans of AI and sort of looking at the world with more excitement than fear. It's also another common thing. And also personal development and AI and personal development and the connection of the two, which I'm also very much interested in. And I always have a hard time to explain to people what's the relationship of those. So that's going to be another topic.
Great.
And so this episode is a sort of part of a mini series on AI and creativity. My previous guests were Tatiana Samopian, who is an expert in creative writing, and Joa Glad, who's teaching writing. And so now we talk about the writing industry, writing in general, and personal development. So my first question would be to introduce yourself, like in your small summary that GPT gave me. I was curious, why did you get into enterprise software, and why did you get into the writing, and how did this happen?
I've always been into both things, software businesses and writing, and I've loved writing since I was really little. The first thing I really wanted to be was a writer, a novelist. In fact, I'm not a novelist currently, but there's still time. And Software I got into, I wanted to be a novelist when I was in like third grade or fourth grade, and I got into software when I was in fifth grade. I wanted to be, I decided I didn't have enough stuff to write about, so I figured I'd write later, and decided instead that I wanted to become Bill Gates. Um, and I wanted to start a Microsoft competitor, and I was going to name it Megasoft. And that's why I decided to learn to code. And I was programming a lot in middle school. I started to build little businesses in high school. I sold BlackBerry apps and iPhone apps, and that's how I paid for gas and food. And then when I was in college, I started this company called Firefly, enterprise software company. We did co-browsing. Co-browsing is sort of like screen sharing, but instead of sharing a desktop, you share it on a web page, and we applied it to customer service. So customers having a problem with a website and they call into support, we allowed the agent to look over their shoulder, see what they're doing on the website, and help them through the site in real time. Why did I get into it? I don't know. It was a weekend hack project. And it just seemed like a good business, and me and my friends just kept going with it. I think at that time I don't know, I was really motivated to build a software business, and I wanted it to be what I would call back then like a real business, so
Mhm.
something like a SaaS business basically.
Mhm.
And the business that it ended up being was we started doing it was like SMB self-serve type stuff, and we eventually just sort of started to go out market. And yeah, I mean, if you want to build a real business, B2B SaaS is a good place to be. Um, and in terms of every or becoming a writer, um, after I ran that business for a while, I sold it, and then I spent a while like trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I wrote a novel, which I didn't finish, so cannot call myself a novelist. Did some investing. I worked in an incubator, all that kind of stuff. And then, like 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to start another software company, and I wanted to do like a tools for thought, Rome, Notion type thing. And I had a bunch of ideas for it. But I was like, I really want to do some customer interviews. I want to understand how smart, interesting people are using their productivity software right now, so I can make something that works for them, that solves a problem for them. But I needed a way to get interesting, famous people to like let me see how they take notes. Um,
Mhm.
and so I said, well, why don't I just start a newsletter? I'll tell them that I'm interviewing them for the newsletter, and I'll write the interviews. But then I'll build software. And so that's what I did. It was called Super Organizers. And I just sort of got stuck on the interview part of it. Like I loved doing the interviews. I love writing the newsletter. And it was sort of right at the beginning of the creator economy wave in 2020. And so decided to start it as a business with my co-founder Nathan, and here we are.
And so those interviews were already podcasts or just you wrote them down?
I was writing them.
I
Yeah,
see,
at that
see, see.
time I was writing them. I only started doing the podcast interview stuff like I don't know, like 4 months ago.
Ah, okay, okay, yes, yes, okay. I will ask you about that too, but the first thing, I didn't know you were a coder too. It's so interesting because I wanted to get into this a little bit, like what's the relationship between writing and coding, especially
Mm.
that these AIs do both.
Hmm.
And we, like in my research, we use them a lot for writing code.
Hmm.
And of course, they hallucinate and they can't really, do everything, and they make a lot of errors. But the one thing we want to do is to ground them and execute the code and give feedback to them. Uh, and it's, I mean, one of the things I see in the research, AI research, is that there is this dream now that you can use these AIs to automate stuff which haven't been standardized yet, because
Mm.
usually automation comes after standardization.
Hmm.
And writing is definitely something like that. It's there's no like there's a lot of effort to put into how to structure writing, but I
Hmm.
wouldn't call it standardization. So I'm very curious about how you see the relationship between coding and writing, and how like GPT gets into that picture.
Mm. By the relationship between coding and writing, do you mean like actual code and actual writing,
No,
like
the act,
sentences,
the
the
act.
act
You're
for
you're
a
you're
human,
you're writing code, or you're
for a
writing
human?
text, or what is
Yeah.
similar in it.
Um, similarities. They both involve staring at a computer and typing on a keyboard. Um, I think that there's like a certain amount of overlap in terms of like some of the thinking that you're doing. Um, in programming, obviously, like you're kind of like thinking through the logical structure of a piece of code. Um, and in writing, you're often doing that too. So I think there's probably a lot of similarities. And one thing that's really interesting is in language models, when they train language models, even if they're not going to use it for code, they uh, they train it on code um, because it improves its reasoning. And I think that like facility with reasoning is a common thing between good writers and good programmers. Um, but there's a lot of differences too. I mean, uh, code, like you're writing logic, right? It has a function, a specific function that can be right or wrong. And one of the like really nice things about that is that there's a really quick feedback loop between trying something and seeing a result. And it almost becomes like this like game or like a puzzle, you know? And so it's really easy to get into flow with programming and just like lose yourself in it and like wake up like 6 hours later and be like, what the hell happened? But like that was awesome. And I think writing can be like that, but often um in terms of like flow, but it's really not like that in terms of like you can say so you can write something and it's either right or wrong and you can tell immediately. It's really more like you're just kind of throwing things out there and trying to like see how it makes you feel, and like different sentences will make you feel different ways, and you're trying to like improve it and like kind of like start at the first sentence and make that good, and then then go to the next one and go to the next one and go to the next one, and like um the feedback loop on that is like, I mean, I guess
Mm,
it's sort of instantaneous in one sense because you're like seeing like, oh, like does this make me feel good or whatever? But like it's not as
mm,
immediately satisfying. It's more painful somehow to write than it
exactly.
is like write code. Um,
Exactly.
it's interesting though because I like writing a lot better. Like
Uh-huh.
it's easier for me to like just get addicted to coding. Like I got excited by this programming project, and so I've been like coding a lot the last couple days. So it's easy for that to happen for me. Um, but I feel like the satisfaction I get from it is like it's like somewhat less satisfying than actually writing something that I think is amazing. But I think
Mm.
both are great, and I love doing both.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would have answered almost the same thing. Like, coding is much more left hemisphere for me, and the only time I forgot to get on an airplane. I was in waiting for the gates to open, and by the time I opened my eyes, they were closed. And that only happens when I'm coding. It cannot happen when I'm writing. It's more
Yeah,
like full brain, and that's why it's more painful too, because you have to like juggle concepts, and
yeah.
it's
When you're writing, you're checking to see like, is the plane boarding yet?
exactly. And that's why I get all those apps are so harmful for that. When I'm coding, I don't procrastinate.
Yeah.
When I'm
Yeah.
writing, it's always, I want to switch. Yeah. Okay. So um, I want to understand a little bit let's call it writing industry. I don't know, like content producing industry, where I have two blogs, one in Substack, one on Medium. I used Medium for a longer time and I started to write technical stuff there. I have a little bit bigger audience. And also they have a sort of business model where I can submit my article to collections of similar articles, like a journal, and then it's published in that journal. It looks like a journal. And on Substack, I feel more like I'm on my own. They give you some tools, but most of the marketing I do, and it's a nice interface, but not much more. And so
Yeah.
I'm wondering where every fits in this. It seems to me more like closer to classical journal, where people uh, add their content, but it's still like sort of like a journal, and you provide editing services to them. But it's not completely like New York Times, right?
Yeah.
How does it work and how does it fit into the industry? All these business models are
It's a good
exciting for
question. It's sort of, I mean, yeah, it's like a magazine. And it's a publication. We write a daily email. There are a couple regular columnists. There's me, there's Evan, who's our lead writer, and then we have a bunch of contributing columnists and guest writers. And so I think you can think a bit of it a little bit like Substack, but there's an editor and it's gated. So there's only certain people who are allowed to publish, and the editor decides what's get published and what doesn't, which is just how a magazine operates. Um, and I think like where does it fit in? I don't know. Like when we started, we had this idea that the way that internet writing was going was sort of you said, Substack, you feel like you're sort of on your own. And that's sort of what we saw is like
Hmm.
it's going to a place where people are basically on their own, building their own businesses. And we were kind of asking ourselves, is there a way to write on the internet that allows people to work together without getting rid of all the benefits of being on a Substack type thing, like getting a share of the revenue and like all that kind of stuff. And we experimented with lots and lots of different models of like
Hmm.
revenue sharing and like subscriber attribution, all this stuff. And it turned out to be very complicated and none of it really worked. So it's really just a traditional magazine where some of the writers get paid a salary, some of the writers get paid a contracting fee. We also one of the things that we do that's sort of a holdover from that time, but I think it's kind of interesting is we let writers that are on staff uh, leave with their list. So leave with
Ah,
our list. So if they leave, they get a copy of all the subscribers.
hmm.
So when they're on staff, they're incentivized to like help us grow because it's theirs to take when they leave.
I see.
Um, and the way that we structure that is they basically are they can buy it in a seller financed way. So
Hmm.
if they decide to leave and they decide they want to take a copy of the list, they if they start making money from it, they pay us a percentage of that of the money they get above their like regular salary range until they've paid off the value of the list, which I think is kind of cool because it's
Hmm.
there's all these like weird incentives with publishers like you want your writers to get famous and do great but you don't want them to do that great because then they'll leave
Ah, I see.
and and so what we were trying to do is construct a deal where we could if someone blew up and we could be super happy for them and be like great, like that's amazing, like you can leave if you want, like we would love you to stay, but like if you feel like you want to leave, that's great, like you can have the list and have it be something that was a great thing for both of us.
Hmm.
Because in the case that they leave, we get a nice chunk of change, and if the case that they that and or if they don't, that's great too. So that's the idea.
So how do you find writers? What's the screening process?
Twitter.
Ah, I
If
see.
you write good tweets, then you'll probably write good articles.
It's true
Yeah,
because
it's
the
true.
size is different.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And like people post their articles and stuff on Twitter, so if I
Hmm.
see them, but yeah, it's mostly Twitter.
So you approach them.
Sometimes, and then sometimes they reach out to us.
I see, I see, I see. Okay, and then you do you have something like you develop them or they
Mhm.
just come ready? You
So we
coach
definitely
them?
develop people. Like I spend a lot of time. Our editor in chief, Kate, spends a lot of time. We have other editors on staff, with writers, helping them get better. Like that's one of the pleasures of this job is like helping people build skills. But the people that work with us, like you have to already be a certain level of
Hmm.
talent or skill in order to work with us. Unfortunately, because we just have like limited time and limited resources. So I think everyone that we work with is already very good, but we do a lot to develop them, and I love that part of the work we do.
So they write, you edit, and you can go back and forth. Huh?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Kate actually wrote that our job at Every is to tell you the future.
Hmm.
So what is the gist of Every? What does it mean tell the future? Because it can mean a lot of things.
what does it mean to tell someone the future?
Yeah, like
Yeah. I think that the things that we care about, we write for people who are building technology. We write for people in tech. We write about business, we write about technology, and we write about what I call the examined life. Those are the three big topics, and I think like all of those three, one of the most important things in those categories is like what is the future? Like what's going to happen, right? And um, that doesn't mean that we're like trying to be fortune tellers. Like I think mostly the future is unknowable, but one of my like feelings about the future is that it often exists in like little pockets in your experience already. And good writers are just really good at like being able to like recognize those little like pockets of the future and then pull them out and write about them. Um, and and good writers are like that means that good writers are often like living in the future, even if not entirely, like just a little bit. And so our job is to like be at the edge and notice
I
what we see and then talk about it honestly.
see.
And sometimes that's having good conversations with people. It's following what's happening on Twitter. Sometimes it's building stuff. Like I'm building little things right now, and like that really informs like how I think about, you know, how programming or writing or whatever will change over the next couple years with AI. So it's it's all of those things.
So interesting. I think entrepreneurs also do this, right? They live right at the edge, and I found it so in my life so difficult to calibrate this, to be not too much in the future, because then it will happen or not, but might happen, and then you just bitter about it that you
Yeah.
saw this 10 years ago, you didn't you do anything about it because it was
Yeah.
so hard 10 years ago. So it's somehow like the art of seeing just peak a little bit
Yeah.
ahead, right?
You don't want to be too ahead of your time, at least in starting companies. I think in writing, it can be frustrating to be too ahead of your time because like no one pays attention to you, but like you can look really prescient if you were said something really smart 10 years ago that turned out to be true, even if it takes 10 years for you to be like, recognized for it. Like that's the thing about writing is it lasts and it doesn't have a
Hmm.
time window. So if you saw it 10 years ago or now you see something now that'll happen in 10 years, like write about it. Maybe no one will care right now, but that doesn't matter because you'll be able to point to it in 10 years and that'll be really cool.
But from in my experience, it doesn't work that way, because 10 years from now or 9 years from now, when the 10 years is only 1 year ahead, there will be a lot of people start writing about it, and your stuff that you wrote 10 years ago will go unnoticed. Like I saw this in research. Like neural nets were really not in fashion at a certain moment. They were in the early 90s. It was a big boom. A lot of people got into it. And the people that you see today, the sort of godfathers of neural nets, are those who survived the winter by very skillful management of their career. And I know a lot of people who were in neural nets in the 90s, and you don't know them, even though they, so that they have foreseen the future, but they didn't manage to sort of persevere
Yeah.
in a
I
smart
mean,
way.
for sure. It's not like an automatic thing, but it definitely improves your chances if you write stuff down.
Yes. Okay, so you also write in every, right? So what is your special sauce that you add to this?
I mean, I write about AI. I write specifically about ChatGPT right now. And I have like a couple of like pet topics. I think like one of them is how to use ChatGPT as like a creative tool. How to use ChatGPT to understand human behavior, so your own psychology, the psychology of others, so you can make decisions, live your life better, all that kind of stuff. Um, uh, yeah, I think those are like the big ones, and then I have a couple other like smaller little offshoots like ChatGPT and philosophy. How does ChatGPT change how we see ourselves in the world, or like ChatGPT and science? Like how does and this is not really a ChatGPT specific one, but it's like how does AI change science? Are all questions. So um I think like, and then I'm like just covering like when someone releases a new model, how is it? What's it good for? Like all that kind of stuff. Um, and yeah, I think I have a couple of these like big questions that I'm sort of trying to tackle, and it's sort of the intersection of AI and like thinking and creating and living a good life, like something like that, you know? So yeah, it's really fun. I love it.
So all of those topics interest me a lot. I don't even know where to start. So let's start maybe AI and personal development psychology,
Sure.
where when GPT came out, there was this okay, GPT can be a therapist, and probably it can't if you just approach it in the wrong way, and
Hmm.
then you bounce back. And it is not a person. I see a lot of people projecting personhood into
Hmm.
GPT, and your cognitive self knows that it's not. So and everything you've seen in GPT is probably your projection, which is
Hmm.
actually something to be analyzed.
Hmm.
I think like your relationship with GPT is definitely a good topic for therapy. And
Definitely.
so how do you use it for self development, and what are the tools that it's good for?
I do a lot of stuff. I mean, so I teach a course on this with Dr. Gina Gorlin, who's a clinical psychologist, called Maximize Your Mind with ChatGPT. Um, and so the structure of that course, I think, is a really good example of like how I use it, which is the first week we go through using ChatGPT. These are the first and second week actually. We go through using ChatGPT as a bit of a mirror. So we have it identify personality patterns or um, patterns in what you like, patterns in your taste, or um, patterns in your thinking style. Like there's all these kinds of things that I think ChatGPT is really good at. Like if you give it a journal entry, a couple journal entries, and you're like, hey, like, what do you notice? It's really good at reflecting back, like this is who you are in this moment, or this is what I see, and it's really cool for that because it's objective, it's accessible all the time, it's like very grounded in your own data, like there's a bunch of it's private, like there's all this stuff that makes it like really really good. It's honest, where like a therapist or like a friend or whatever, like they would, whatever. The thing about it that is not so good at it is like it's really nice.
Too
um
nice.
and so uh, and so like sometimes you have to be like it's fine to be mean, or sometimes just have it like give you a bit of like give it a persona of the kind of person that you
I
want
see.
advice from, but it's just, I mean, it's just really fantastic for that. I love using it and I've learned so much about myself from it. And then the second half of the course is about using it to set goals and achieve them. So one of the things in the sort of
Hmm.
setting goals front is like um well, sorry. In the first 2 weeks, we also, one of the things we unpack is our values. Like what do we want to move towards, like all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Second half is like pick a goal, set it, and achieve it. And one of the things that we do is there's a technique called motivational interviewing, which basically allows. It was developed for helping alcoholics to quit and to get sober. And the basic idea of motivational interviewing is that often when a person has decided to do something like get sober, but then doesn't do it, it's because they have like a bunch of conflicting forces inside of them, like where parts of them actually don't want to be sober.
Hmm.
Um, and so they're not like fully committing. They're not like fully committing with their full heart. They're just like there's part of them that is, but like there's parts of them that aren't. And so what motivational interviewing is designed to do is help you understand the conflicting forces inside of you and then also help you to resolve them in one way or another. And so and ChatGPT, it turns out, is like a really good motivational interviewer.
I see.
So in the yeah so
Hmm.
in the first in the kind of like set a goal
Hmm.
period, we have it do motivational interviews with people to like help them, or we teach them how to use it to do motivational interviews to help them like kind of unpack, okay, like what's really going on for me, and like
What
how
do
do
I
I
really
like
want? Yeah.
fully commit to this goal.
I see.
And then in the next session we talk about these what we call dragons. So it's like often when you are moving towards something, there's something getting in the way. There are dragons.
Mm,
And there's a couple of different ways psychologically to deal with dragons. One way is to sort of like face it head on and to like slay it. Um, and that's like sort of using a lot of tools that if you're familiar with psychology, like sort of like CBT type stuff where it's
mhm,
like
mhm. Yeah.
you're becoming aware of cognitive distortions and you're like, is this actually true? Like you're truly like questioning your assumptions and all that kind of stuff, and you're sort of like reasoning your way through like,
Mm.
is this a real dragon? And that'll like often sort of make it not a problem, or sort of slay it. And then another way to deal with dragons, and there are more than two ways, but this is a short course. So like another way to deal with dragons is to um, is to shrink them down to size and take them with you, to sort of change your
Mm. Yeah.
relationship to them so that they're not as big, and they're not as threatening, and you can do what you want to do even though they are around. They're just
You
not really a
tame
problem
them, right?
anymore. Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And so, and that's more on the act, except, I almost said obsessive compulsive disorder. Uh, acceptance and commitment therapy sort of part of the spectrum where
Uh-huh.
you're just using techniques to like make the thoughts or feelings or whatever a little further away and allow you to kind of do what you need to do. And I think ChatGPT is great for both of those things. On the CBT side, it's just like it's really good at doing the like like the five whys. It's like you have you have like a thought like I'm really nervous to like go on this podcast or whatever, and then a classic CBT technique is to be like why, and you'd be like,
Mm.
well, because I might mess up. Like, well, why would that be horrible or whatever? And it's like, well, because if I messed up, then everyone would hate me, and I'd be alone, right? And so if you do it enough, you kind of like get down to this like core belief, and the core
Mm.
belief is
Mm.
is usually like something that pops up in various places in your life, and once you've identified it, you can kind of like hopefully slay it, prove to yourself that it's not true in some way. And ChatGPT is really good for identifying it and then working with it. And then on the other side, like let's say you can't, sometimes though these things aren't really changeable, and no matter how many experiences you have, you may not sort of get over it. So you have to learn to like live with it, but like take it with you. And it's really good for that too. Like one of the things we did is had people Dolly is the like image generator for ChatGPT, and like we had people like write out their core belief and then have it like be put on a t-shirt that they're like Dolly would put it on a t-shirt that like an avatar of theirs would wear, and it would look kind of silly, and like being able to like laugh at like I'll be alone and everyone will hate me, like seeing that like written out is just like you're like, well, that's ridiculous, like no one's like. And so I think it's actually really good for this kind of stuff, like because all of these techniques, like they're used throughout psychology and psychotherapy and all that kind of stuff, but they're really limited. They're kind of dry and limited because like they're done with worksheets or whatever, and like you doing it with ChatGPT where it's this like
I see.
multimedia thing is like
Easier.
I
Ah, I
think
see.
a bit more effective.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So interesting. You know a lot about psychology, and I think somewhere you said you're a therapy junkie,
Yeah.
and I am definitely one.
Out of necessity, unfortunately, but also I love it.
So it's so interesting that like if you can almost categorize the population of humanity into two big groups. One that we all suffer, but there is a group which tries to understand why and go. It takes a lot of courage, like a dragon, to actually get answer those questions why, and you get to places where you don't like to be, but we still go through with it.
Hmm.
For me, for a mysterious reason, like I cannot pinpoint why some people start it, some people don't. But once you start it, then these two groups really separate into two. Because once you get into it, I start to like it,
Yeah.
Like, and again,
Totally.
getting deeper and deeper, and there are a lot of positive feedback. I mean,
Yeah.
improving. I got into podcast being an introvert. That was a huge, step, for example, but other stuff too. And then once you get the feedback, then it's all the gates are open, and there you get this like internet world where you do 100 different types of therapy, embodied, not
Yeah.
embodied, and everything. But
Yeah.
there are some people who just cannot get in, and they just live their life and they die, and it's so sad because you see them suffer, and just even like feels like they die before they die because they cannot change,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
there's a lot there. I mean, I think therapy is amazing. I think or just generally the process of personal discovery is amazing, and it is sort of like this thing that once you start, it's like you just keep going, kind of, you know. And I do think that there are a lot of people who like sort of want to be on that path, but for some reason can't get themselves to, or like I don't know, like some of this stuff, I mean, now it's less so, but like therapy and like all this stuff is like very inaccessible. It's very hard to know who to see and what to do. And people have like busy lives and they're crushed with like they have kids and they have jobs and the money's tight and they can't afford it, all that kind of stuff. And I think AI is actually um quite promising to me in terms of making some of this stuff more widely distributed and accessible to people that want it. And then I think on the other hand, there are a lot of people who are just who actualize in different ways
Hmm.
and who learn how to be themselves in a different way with and don't need to like explicitly be doing therapy or doing a personal development practice or whatever. They just like fucking love being an accountant or whatever. I don't know. And I think that's great. Like I'd love that. Like if I could do that, I would probably would. But I sort of had to kind of go down this path, and I love it. I think it's amazing. But I'm sort of cautious
uh,
about wanting people to like do the thing that I do or the way that I do it because I think people's minds just like work very differently and what works for
mm,
some people don't work for others and like I think there's a sort of personality trait that's about openness to experience and curiosity and all that kind of stuff that I definitely have and I'm sure that you have that I think lends itself to like some of this like personal
it's true.
discovery type stuff but then there are other people that don't have that but they have other things that they do they're and I think that's great too.
So what did push you into therapy?
Oh, I have like really bad obsessive compulsive disorder, and I was having panic attacks, and
uh,
it was really hard. uh, and so and like ostensibly while I was having all that, like my life was great. Like I just sold my company, and like I was feeling like should have been feeling good, but I was not. And
uh,
and it lasted for like 10 years. Like, it was really like a really tough time for a long time. And so while I was I basically like I went on this journey to be like, well, what's going on and like how do I work with it and all that kind of stuff. And I saw a bunch of different therapists and I started reading all about it and I got really into it because it like happens to also be, I think even before that I was interested in like I studied philosophy in school, so I was interested in philosophy and questions about like how to live and how to make decisions and what the good life is and all that kind of stuff. And I think I mean I can trace that to like when you have stuff that happens to you when you're a kid that you don't understand,
mm,
one way to deal with it is to start to intellectualize and analyze to be
mm,
like, well,
okay.
maybe I could like build a model of the world so that I understand what's going on
Mm,
so it doesn't happen again. And then I think
mm,
that sort of, then if you're smart and you're reading and then you're like, okay, like philosophy might be the thing. So I studied philosophy. And then I think at a certain point you're like, well, this is like pretty abstract.
we're getting
And
further and further away from our
yeah, I don't know if this is
bodies.
helping
Yeah.
me.
Yes.
And so then I got really into psychology and whatever. So I think that's sort of the like path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so what was your OCD was which kind of dragon? How did you deal with it? It was you slayed it or you brought it
You don't
with
slay it,
yourself? No.
unfortunately. You just sort of take it with you.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, OC is horrible. So do not recommend it. But basically the treatment, so OCD is you have obsessions, which are like intrusive thoughts that are like disturbing that pop up all the time, and then you have
Mhm.
compulsions, which are things that you do to like um, minimize the amount of intrusions or how bad they are or whatever, but that crucially don't work. So like the classic OCD person is like constantly checking the locks or constantly washing their hands or whatever. And that's
Mhm.
because they have these like
Mhm.
really scary thoughts about like, oh my God, like I might die because someone might come in my house or like all that kind of stuff. Um and they often know that it's like totally irrational, but like it feels so real that they feel like they have to listen, and then they like do
Ah, I see.
compulsive things that don't work. And so the treatment is exposure and response prevention. So you expose yourself to the
Mm.
thing that you're afraid of and you practice not doing anything about it. Um, and
Hmm.
that usually like helps keep the temperature of this all like a lot lower. Because if you start doing something about it, it like revs you up basically.
I see. I see. It's like
And if you just sit with it, it sort of goes away eventually. And that's basically how they treat it, which to be honest is not great. But it's much better than nothing. And then you pair it with medication, and medication also helps
uh,
a lot. But it's still not like it, you don't solve it. Basically, you just have it.
sounds like it's like a superficial treatment. It doesn't treat it the roots of.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
think you even know what the root is. It's like
I
it's
see.
something actually wrong in your brain. Yeah,
And so then you live with it or you get rid of it?
you live with it. Yeah, it
You
doesn't go
live with
away.
it. I see. I see.
Yeah,
Is there any good side of it? Like, does it help in anything?
no,
No. No.
no.
Okay.
I think like I mean I could maybe make something up. Like maybe I'm more obsessive generally about stuff, and that's helped me or whatever. But no,
Hmm.
I don't think so. I would if you told me like I could get rid of it tomorrow, I would. I just can't.
I see.
Yeah.
Um, so, do you do any embodied practices for therapy? Because this is a little bit my my journey going from talk therapy towards my body because of talk therapy, because I figure out that I'm not living in my body, and so I did a
Mm.
lot of things that I'm thoroughly enjoying, which I couldn't have imagined like 5 years ago, like cold water and
Hmm.
dance and jujitsu. And this I
Mm.
all started them in my 50s.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Not like as a part of a therapy practice specifically, but I mean, I work out 3 days a week. I meditate frequently, and
Mm,
I sat Zen for a long time, and that's a very embodied style of meditation.
mm.
Um, and I love going into cold tubs. But I don't think of that generally as like a like the cold
Ah, I
tub thing
see.
as like a practice. But yeah, I do things to kind of be in my body if I can be. And honestly, I think like it's a good therapy has to be embodied. There has to be like
Mhm,
a
mhm.
sort of connection between what you're saying and what you're feeling, and how you're expressing that in your body. And if there's a disconnect, it's a really good place to work. And a good therapist will notice that. But most therapists aren't good.
Yeah, and they are not really into somatic stuff.
Yeah.
They can be very cognitive.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started the podcast 4 months ago, and for me, this was also therapeutic. Like, I wouldn't have guessed it, you know? I sort of started it for a lot of reasons. Partly wanted to be heard, partly because I really enjoy listening to it, and I was like,
Mm.
things were like staying inside and couldn't express
Mm.
them. So I thought, let's start a podcast, and then it did really help with that.
Mm.
But at the end, I just fell in love with it because it's almost like I almost want to do business, you know, like instead of Twitter where we connect like 2 seconds with somebody, let's do a social media where your unit connection is a discussion when we could teach people how to discuss, how to speak to each
Mm.
other in a sort of non. I don't like debates. They
Hmm.
don't lead anywhere. Maybe somebody who is listening to it, you know, they can project your anger into it, something like that. But I don't think it's useful for anything. So this kind of
Yeah.
discussion where we go together somewhere. It's so nice, and so I just fell in love with the media.
That's great. I love it. That means a lot. I love to hear that.
And so how is it for you? Because you just started also 4 months
Yeah.
ago. You said.
It's been great. I mean, like, I don't know, like I think I've always loved having one-on-one conversations with people. And that has been a part of my writing for a long time because I would do these kind of conversations and then I would write them into interviews. And I stopped doing that because it's like really labor intensive and
Mhm.
it's very rote. Like writing the intro is interesting, but the rest of it is like pretty much a system. Like it's a process. Um, and so I stopped doing that because I got bored. So I think like I'm naturally into one-on-one conversations. I'm curious. I like asking questions. I like kind of getting deep with people, all that kind of stuff. And so it was just a naturally like fun thing to do. And the concept for the show has really hit. Like people seem to like it a lot, and that's always super rewarding. I think podcasts are just like really hard to grow, and this one has grown like really, really well.
Yes,
And
yes.
so it's really nice to have something sort of at the intersection of like I really like doing it. I think I'm pretty good at it. I'm sure I'll get better, but like I feel like I'm good to start, and it's growing. People like it.
Well, yeah, and congratulations because yeah, you really grew fast, and it's.
Thanks.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about GPT and creativity. I saw your
Sure.
interview with David Perell, and there were a lot of interesting thoughts in it. And one of the things he said, it's a baseball metaphor, which in Europe I had to look it up. The GPT is more a slugging percentage than batting average. So what was
Yeah.
this metaphor?
Basically what he was saying there is like people get turned off because they'll like use ChatGPT for for a task and like creative task, like find me a metaphor for this or like help me come up with an idea for this or blah blah whatever. And the first answer they get is bad. And so then they give up and they're like, oh, this sucks. This is stupid. And I think what he was referring to there is on average, the answers are like maybe not that great a lot of the times, but sometimes you get something that is just like it will change your world and it will save you tons of time. And so you have to kind of like filter out the noise and look for the thing that's great. And if you
Mhm.
do that, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And if you just like take the first thing it gives you, it's like not as good.
I see, I see. It's actually something like this happened to me today. Because I have to write a report on a PhD thesis. So I'm reading the thesis, I'm making my notes, and I want GPT to put it into like a professional text. And then my problem with it that it smells like GPT. I don't know how to say this another way. Everybody knows it's GPT, right? So I have to edit it, and I wanted to make it simpler. Sometimes it's for me it's too, I don't know, New Yorker style. It's hard
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
hard
Yeah.
to I want simpler. So I was thinking like, who do I know who writes a simple way yet? Okay, let's do Kurt Vonnegut. So please rewrite me in his style. It didn't get simple, but it got hilarious. It
That's
says
really
things
funny.
like let me just cite it to you. They line up a trio of contenders, an MLP, so a neural net, which is a kind of brain made of mathematical mush. A node transformer, something a bit brainier, and the jazzed up version of the Gato transformer, the brainiest of the bunch, tweaked to handle the dance floor better.
That's great. I
The
mean,
whole
it's
thing is
actually,
this dance floor allegory on a
yeah.
robotics thing. Like, I think I mean, we should always write this kind of research. And then it reminded me to your interview with David, because one of the things you said that you start with GPT for something and you end up with something completely different, which
Yeah.
is hilarious.
Yeah, 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 totally. It's really good for like, and I think that generally the creative process is like that, is you end up places you didn't expect, but that are
Yeah.
great. And I think GPT is great for that. Also, like if you're interested in using it for writing, I think Claude is like fantastic.
Uh-huh.
And if you give Claude some examples of what you want, it'll nail it.
I see.
Yeah.
It's better than GPT.
Yeah.
It's so funny that these things have start to have their own niche or own style or
I know.
something. Nobody, you know,
I know.
intended that, right?
It's really interesting.
Because probably the people who create them have no, they are not writing experts, right?
Yeah.
It just happens. Yeah.
It just happens.
So, yeah, so how do you get rid of the gypsy smell?
Well, I don't really ever take anything wholesale from it.
Hmm.
I'm taking little phrases or the way it organizes something or like little words or like I'm having it solve little micro tasks, but I'm not like having it just like write out a whole thing. But um I do sometimes like I built this little tool last week actually that it's very good at converting text from one format to another. So for example, one of the things I do all the time is I take a pod as I'm releasing a podcast and I need to create a little tweet for it. And it's really labor intensive to like write that. And so I created a little app that I can create a process. I'm calling it a spiral right now, where I can define how it would take a podcast transcript and then turn it into a tweet using a bunch of examples and a bunch of patterns that it pulls out from previous podcast transcript to tweets conversions that I've done.
Ah, I see.
And it's actually quite good. It's like I get you 70, 80% of the way there, and it does not smell like GPT. It sounds like me. So I actually think, particularly with Claude, like I said, like if you give it a lot of examples and tell it what you want, it'll get pretty close to your style.
Hmm. I see. Okay, I'm very much interested in this too.
Yeah.
It sounds fun.
Yeah, but don't use it for giant chunks of text. Like it has to be like sort of micro
Yeah, 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 yeah,
tasks. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, that's one of the mistakes I see people doing that. Like they want too much, too big.
Yeah.
Um, if
Yeah.
for
It's you're not gonna like one
poetry,
shot prompt a
yeah,
novel. It's like
yeah,
not gonna
yeah,
work.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. It has to be iterative. So Tatiana, one of my previous guests who is in creative writing, she said that she sees it very well for research.
Mm.
So if you write a novel and you want a character coming from the other side of the political spectrum or something that you don't really know, you
Yeah.
can ask GPT to
It's
create
so
it.
good. It's good for novelists. It's good for entrepreneurs. Like you can do customer interviews with like people that are hard to interview with GPT. It's yeah, being able to like see different perspectives. It's like fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, meshing two things. I used it for like I don't know. Jonathan Pajot and John Vervaeke both wrote about zombies, and I
Hmm.
wanted to see what's similar, what's
I love
different.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's so good for
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could just publish it as it is because it's two very different and very complex views of the same thing, and it was just really making a good job.
It's great.
So Tatiana also said something that really stayed with me, which is it was more about social media AI than GPT, but the two getting like very close to each other now because of the the reinforcement learning with feedback. Is that like good art makes you want to live your life. Whereas the business model of content is usually like, if you think about Netflix series, they want you to come back and consume more. So there is this like fundamental tension between those two, and somehow because of the business side, it's hard to see how like this generative AI stuff would go in the direction of real art, if even if it was possible, because they would just right out of the bat uh, kill the business.
So who said this that good art makes you want to live your life?
I think it's she cited Borges
Interesting.
on this.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. Not necessarily that it's wrong, but I think it's like that's a subset of good art. And I think like having a really predefined definition of that is like pretty it's just hard to like have a good definition of what art is, but that seems pretty narrow to me. I think like a broader one that I like a little bit better that I think includes this, but it could include lots of other things is like it's about someone honestly expressing some part of who they are, some part of their experience,
Hmm.
um, in a way that other people can see as like true and real, you know? Um, and and I don't think that that necessarily has anything to do with the business model necessarily. Like it can be really engaging, or it can be, yeah, I want to put this down and
Yeah, yeah, no,
go do
no, I
something
understand what you mean. Yes.
else. And I think like I really hesitate to say something like you can't create good art with this because it's just like the history of every technology has been that like the generation of people that grew up and became artists or got to levels of being sort of senior before the technology was around, when it gets introduced, they're like, well, it can never be this XYZ. And like
Yeah.
I'm sure they said the same thing about radio and TV and like whatever. And like um it's just not true. Like we will make good art with language models, with diffusion models. It will be different. And it won't replace other forms of art. Like we've got radio and we've got TV, but we still have books. That's they're still around. It may make some of those like more some of those older formats might consume less hours of our day.
Uh,
Um, and they will probably retain or have their status increased in terms of like they're going to be more expensive, they're going to be rarer, they're going to be harder to produce and all that kind of stuff. But like I would bet anything that we're making like crazy, incredible pieces of art in 20 years with this, and like that the idea that it's not going to be able to be used for that is yeah, it just seems very unlikely to me.
yeah, yeah, no, the context there was more like the addictivity of social media and those kind of contents which suck you in and play with your dopamine system. And so that's sort of like, I mean, the backstory is my story with Facebook, where I got stuck on cage fights, MMA, like 3 years ago, four now. And that was a little bit like what you described. Like I have two sides, the my side in the evening, my frontal lobe turned off and half sleeping, and I was just, just browsing and for hours watching those videos. And
Hmm.
my other side in the morning woke up and said that this is not possible. Like it cannot continue like this. And
Hmm.
so I went to actually do jujitsu. That was one of the consequences, and the other was
Hmm.
I deleted Facebook from my phone,
Hmm.
because that was like the only or the easiest way to control this addiction. So this was the context that where Tatiana said this.
Hmm.
So it's like good art doesn't do that with you. They don't get you addicted to whatever they are. More they more show you something that make you live your life. And that was the context, and that's why I thought like to bring it up. It's a sort of because it's a question, like all of the things are looking for your attention, and so you usually make money as a business or as a social media company by catching people's attention. And so this is a little bit, this is where the tension was in her mind. But yeah, I completely understand what you're saying, that it's and I agree actually that as a tool we will use it to make art.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, there's always this sort of trade-off between mass appeal and entertainment value and like what we typically like say is like quality, you know?
Mhm.
Like the things that like artists love are just not necessarily the things that like the general public loves.
I see.
Um, and yeah, I think that that's interesting. I'm a little bit like I'm right now, personally right now, I'm feeling defensive of the idea that YouTube videos or Hollywood movies or social media posts could be art. Not all of them, some of them though.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, but I
Yeah,
definitely see the
absolutely. Yeah.
point.
No, no.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah,
just a medium. Yeah. And
yeah.
so where do you think writing will go with GPT? Like in general, like creative writing, or even business writing. But let's say creative writing. Like which is the direction it will take? How people will use this, and how will it change things?
I don't know. I mean, I would just like look at how they're already using it. Like you said, like having like representing a character's perspective or whatever, much easier with GPT. I imagine that it will make certain writers like significantly more productive, being able to like write more of the same thing that they were already writing, or
Wow.
write things that they can never could have written before. And I'll give you an example. Like um, I'm very into philosophy. I studied it in college, but n not after college. But after college, I just like read a lot of it. And there are certain philosophers that are who are so like dense and hard to parse that like I like read them, but like I just knew that there's stuff I was missing. And I can read
Ah,
any philosopher now because I just feed into ChatGPT and like it just tells me like I'm in grad school, you know? And that means that I
hmm,
can write things that I wouldn't have been able to write before because
hmm.
I can be like, I can write it and then I can be like, is this right? And it will tell me. And it's
That's so
generally
true.
right. And so it like unlocks all of these projects that I might have been motivated to do, but like could never do because it would be like, I have to
Too
go back to
much
school or
research. Yeah.
I have
Mhm.
to raise money or like I have to do all this like get other people to help me or whatever. And now I just can like do it. Um, and
Hmm.
so yeah, I think that that is great and that will happen.
And a lot of more connections can happen in like this
Yeah.
narrative
Um,
space, huh? Yeah.
and I think there's probably there'll probably be new formats of like I don't know what the format of an essay or a book is in a GPT world, but like there's something new. Maybe it's
Mhm,
chatbot. Maybe it's there's
mhm.
some other medium that we have yet to like sort of invent or popularize that's like
Ah, I see. It can be
um
interactive,
yeah.
something. Yeah.
And I don't know how it works yet, but like
Mhm.
I think it's coming.
Yeah, like you look those dialogue tools. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Hmm. One thing I was thinking, like, if we get into this very granular, very personalized content creation, where let's say video is going, and even text,
Yeah.
it's sort of because all this the like content had not only the purpose of like entertainment and satisfying the persons, but also that you went to school and talked about the series that you saw on
Yeah.
TV. You know, I'm 50 years old, so I grew into the internet
Yeah.
area, but before it was TV series and everybody was watching the same thing. The family was looking at sort of like in
Yeah.
even the mass, you know, like in the
Yeah.
church. And then the day after you talked about it, and now it's Netflix, so we can still
Yeah.
talk about the series if it's high enough. So
Hmm.
we saw, but not at the same time. But once we get into like really personalized films, it's going to like society falls apart.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. Um, and I think you can see this a little bit with like search results. Like we get
Mm.
different search results depending on who we are. And so I think there's a potential for that. But I actually think particularly with like pop culture things, um, and with certain ideas, I don't think that it will be personalized to the extent that we can't talk about it or that we're not having any common experiences. Because it is to the creator of the art or to the company that employs the creator or whatever. It's to all those people's advantage if other people can talk about it to their friends and like share it, and it's to the advantage of the people who are consuming it, because like you don't want to, no one wants to like not be able to share your thing, not be able to talk about what happened last night at the. So I think humans just like have this desire to create and share common stories, and and you can and that's like the most effective way to communicate. Like, I don't know, take like, he sucks, but like take Donald Trump, right? Like, the thing that one of the things that makes him quite effective as a communicator, even though he's, you know, I don't know, I don't think he says smart things. But he just repeats slogans all the time,
Yes,
and
it's like almost like a joke.
that works,
Yes.
and it's he fills in around the slogans with other things, but like, but every couple minutes is a slogan, and I bet he's doing the same thing in person. And I imagine that interactive forms of art built like what GPTs or even games are sort of like this too. Like, you can think about it in a game, like every player is having a different experience when
Mhm.
they beat all the levels, but
Mm.
the way that experience happens for them is different.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm,
where
mhm,
they move in at exactly
mhm,
that
mhm.
time or whatever, it's different. But like there are waypoints, or
Ah,
there are parts of it that are consistent across everybody. And I think that that will be the like dominant form of interactive content, is like,
mm.
there are these fundamental pillars of what's being expressed that are the same for everyone, so everyone's having the same experience, but there are certain tweaks that are made that like are personalized to you, so it really resonates with you.
I see, like
And I think
reality,
that's the like,
basically. Yeah.
that's like the, yeah, that's like the middle ground.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how it'll work, but like I think that'll happen.
I see, I see. That's interesting. So it's like, yeah, like reality.
Yeah. Or it's like talking to a person. Like,
Yeah.
the way
Everybody.
that I express my ideas to you is different from how I might express it to my mom,
Yeah.
but I probably have mostly the same ideas.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, okay, okay. So there was something you said in the beginning, that you also have some thoughts on AI and science, which is
Mm,
very interesting
yeah.
to
I
me.
got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, I think that science has been obsessed with explanations for a very long time. For like causal explanations for how things work in the world, to find like underlying theories. And the reason why science is obsessed with explanations is because explanations, well, maybe because they're beautiful, but also because they allow us to make predictions.
Mhm.
Um, like if I put this much fuel into the rocket, like, and light it up, it's going to go this far at this trajectory or whatever, and I can predict it. Um, because we have all these theories about, um,
Mhm.
I don't know what
Yeah.
the theories of
Yeah.
physics,
Newton. Yeah.
rocket science,
Yeah.
you know,
Rocket
we have a lot of
science.
theories. Um, and and I think that's taken us really far for the last 300 years, and it has created this like emphasis on rational thought and analysis and like analytical thinking, all that kind of stuff. And what's really interesting is it hasn't really worked in certain areas of science. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
so like psychology is
Yeah.
my pet example. Um, we psychology has been around as a field since Freud, so it's like 130 years or 150 years, or I don't know, something like that, like over 100 years. And we still don't really know what depression is. Like we don't have a scientific theory of depression. We kind of like, we can kind of tell if you got it because we ask you questions, and like if you're like can't get out of bed a lot, you're probably
I,
depressed.
I remember your interview with the psychologist who said that, yeah, depression is what lithium cures.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
That
exactly.
created the category out
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the
Manic depression is what
mushy
lithium
thing
cures.
of,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
It's yeah.
exactly.
And so, but we keep coming up with with depression theories, like depression is repressed rage, or depression is learned helplessness. Like there's all these theories, right? Because we've always needed to have a theory in order to
Yeah.
make predictions. And I think what's interesting about um AI and machine learning is that if you have enough data, you can make predictions without theories. Um,
Ah, yes, that's
and so you turn like a scientific problem into an engineering problem.
hmm.
You sort of unbundle prediction from explanation, and I think you could build AI models that predict who's going to get depression or who has it or who's going to get better or what treatments are going to work or all that kind of stuff. And so, A, that's really great because it's like you can make progress on lots of things that like we haven't been able to make progress on for a long time. And B, what's really interesting is that if you can effectively predict depression, you probably inside of your neural net have a theory for what it is encoded in there somewhere, and you can probably find it.
I see.
Um,
Okay, okay.
um,
Hmm.
but my theory is that while you could find it, what we will probably find is for most of psychological things we care about, the theories inside of the neural nets to predict them will be so big that we actually couldn't hold them in our heads
Hmm.
like rationally.
Hmm.
Um, but what's really like interesting is um, I think that there are people now, like if you see a great clinician, they'll talk to you and they'll look at you and they'll be like, "This is what you have, and this is what'll work for you," and they'll be right. But they don't
You
have
don't
a
know why.
theory of
Yeah, yeah.
depression. They know it in their bones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think AI can sort of develop that same sense with
Mm-hmm.
a very significant difference, which is that you can copy and paste the weights into someone else into some other computer that can treat anyone else. Um, and that's super powerful because like you can get the
Mm-hmm.
best clinician, you can just like copy paste them into like lots and lots of different places all at once, which is amazing. But I think it may also um, change our change the way that we think about the difference between rational thinking, analytical thinking, and emotion and intuition, and change our emphasis, or at least balance our emphasis a little bit to like evaluate like how important all the intuitive stuff that we do is and how unexplainable that is in a lot of ways to our rational minds. Because now we have tools that can like
Mm-hmm.
get that out of our brains and bodies and like put it out in the world and we can use as tools. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that that's like really cool. And Yeah, we'll see what happens.
It's okay. It's sort of like because it's very personalized in a certain sense. It's very first person, these intuitions.
Yeah.
That's because you cannot formalize them and put it on another medium like paper.
Yeah.
It's embodied by
Yeah.
the person, by the expert.
Basically what you're dealing with is problem spaces that are equifinal. So um you have like a bunch of different starting configurations that can all end in the same thing. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of different ways that you can be depressed. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
is another way to say that, or get depression. Right? There's a lot of these. There's like maybe 1,000 different things that contribute to whether or not you get depression, and they all contribute like a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's like all those different configurations could lead to depression, and so it's like really hard to come up with an explanation for that because like one in one configuration it's just like this one over here is like really turned up and all the rest of them are off, or this one over here is turned up and this one over here is turned up a little bit and there's a couple over here, and like that also like adds up to the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. It adds up to depression. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so coming up with that as a theory,
Yeah,
it's
it's not a
totally
theory.
different from like normal science where we're like, well, we're going to do a double blind study where like we manipulate this one little variable. Like you literally can't do that in psychology. There's always like
Yeah.
thousands and thousands and thousands of variables acting. We just pretend like that's not actually true and it's true.
Yeah.
Um, and so you need systems that are very, very good at knowing how lots and lots and lots of different factors all add up to a result, and can all add up to the same result even if they're different. So like, and that's exactly what language models do, right? Like the next word in a sentence is influenced by all of the
Mm-hmm.
words that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to have the word, king,
There's a lot of ways to do it.
it's at the end of the sentence, there are infinitely many sentences that come before that could result in king.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's a very similar problem to predicting like psychological states.
I see. And categories that are formed somehow. It reminds me to cancer actually,
Mm.
because there was this big dream that you can cure cancer by sequencing the genome, but it turns out that it's essentially every cancer is unique,
Yeah.
and it depends on the person. It depends on all kind of circumstances, and what's common in them is that you create a new monocellular organism in your body somehow. It mutates into its old self, and then your immune system is weak and it doesn't kill it. So that's
Mm.
common. But they
Mm.
all, and so I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating what you're talking about, but I'm not sure if it's actually can become science even in the predictive way because of the multiplicity of the causes.
Yeah, I don't know. Like that's the most interesting thing is like it might not, but like it would still work. And then it would have to cause us to reevaluate like we put the science on this pedestal, like should it
Mhm.
be on the same
Mm,
pedestal now? Like
yeah,
is there something else that we need to add to it or whatever? Like obviously science is still
yeah,
important, but like
absolutely.
it's a whole different way of thinking about things because we have new tools. Um and so that's just really exciting to me.
So I actually, so this is for example, something I talked about 10 years ago, then I sort of abandoned that line of things. But what I was thinking about that it's also helpful in creativity, scientific creativity, connecting stuff. And that's, we already see it a little bit like, protein folding is that kind of thing. Like, or even GPT, I mean, you can consider every piece of text it writes a sort of theory, right? So in the theory space, you can also try to do something like that. And it's, for me, it's very interesting because that's part of science, which we, since Popper, forcefully pushed out of the philosophy of science because we said
Hmm.
it's too hard.
Hmm.
Like how do ideas pop up in the scientist's head?
Mm.
And that's sort of like, I like that sort of direction because it connects the scientist to the science, and which is one of my
Mm.
pet subjects,
Mm.
trying to like unify myself with the
Mm.
subject I'm studying.
Mm.
And uh, that could be very interesting too, if of course you have to still check the theory, but generating it. And so for example, like
I get it, yeah.
it's actually happening in drug design,
Mm.
where you for a long time you already had robots to actually try the experiment
Yeah.
and put the solutions together and see the reactions and wait and see the result. But there are like closed systems now where even the composition that you will test is automatically created by some
Yeah.
kind of generative AI.
That is actually really interesting. So my memory of Popper is sort of like you said, one of the sort of famous things that he was thinking about is that science does not proceed by induction. Um, like there's a creative act by a scientist to like come up with a theory to test and falsify, right? And I think what you're saying, coming off the point I just made, is like actually creativity might be a form of induction, just like it's happening at this
Uh,
level that's like very subconscious, and we're trying all these different combinations of things our brain is, and then it forms into an idea. But the creative act is like induction in the same way that like uh uh predicting the next token is induction. It's just a very, very, very
hmm,
complicated induction that's not subject to like rational inquiry. Um, I don't
uh,
I don't know if this is true, but like you're just making me think of that.
Yes, no, it's very interesting because I've been in machine learning, we have this notion of distributions, like as if data was coming from randomly from some kind of oracle. And then this is so ingrained in the language of machine learning that we now talk about in distribution and out of distribution because reality doesn't work like that. And the data that we use are not coming from a random distribution. There is some randomness in it, but it's mostly constructive. We go
Hmm.
after the data.
Yeah.
And this is, I think there must be some kind of paradigm change somewhere down the road in the theory of learning, where
Mhm.
data collection and data generation becomes part of the theory, which now is
Mhm.
not.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, the connection between those two, because, like, yeah, I mean, language is not random.
Yeah.
We all the machinery that we invented came out of this theory that everything is random and a
Yeah.
neural network somehow approximates some kind of platonic thing. But I think this theory does not describe anymore what's happening.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I
So
love it.
so this is where creativity, like going out of the distribution. This is how I would say it as a machine learning jargon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really that, there's no distribution. It's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
unique combination of discrete
Yeah.
things. It's not,
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Okay, we got somewhere. Okay. So usually at the end of the podcast, I ask my guest to ask me one question, like change the roles.
How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? Actually,
Yeah.
that's so interesting because I was just thinking about it 2 minutes ago. That usually when this podcast is a little bit earlier, like 6 p.m. to 8 in my time,
Hmm.
I get really tired by the end.
Hmm.
And now that I started 9:30 and now it's almost 11, I thought I would, go out of tension, but it's not. Actually, I'm more alive. So
That's
that gave
great.
me an idea, like maybe I should schedule like, at least the North American guests later.
I love it. That's always great. It's always fun to come out of one of these conversations more energized. So thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
And thank you then for accepting the invitation, and I really loved it. And good luck with all your enterprises because I'm really a big fan of
Thank
everything
you. I
that you
appreciate it.
do. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
same to you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye bye then.
Bye.